California Governor Gavin Newsom has signed a bill into law that aims to protect transgender youth and their families from out-of-state bans on gender-affirming care. The bill seeks to make California a sanctuary state for transgender minors and their families who flee areas that have restricted access to gender-affirming care. Newsom's bill provides safeguards meant to block out-of-state attempts to penalize families that seek this kind of care.
The legislation allows California to take temporary emergency jurisdiction over a child that traveled to the state for gender-affirming treatments, taking away parental custody. Parental rights groups around the country have raised the alarm about the bill, arguing that it violates the Constitution by wrongly claiming jurisdiction over families from other states. The group sent a letter to Newsom last month asking him to veto the legislation, this according to the Center Square. So where are you on this, Robby?
Yeah, so look, the bill might just be, law now, I guess it was signed, might just be unconstitutional. It sounds like even its legislative backer, that Scott Wiener character, I think that's his name, has conceded that. I'm looking at the Los Angeles Times where he says we may have, where he acknowledges that uncertainties. He says the bill was crafted carefully to hopefully avoid violating the U.S. Constitution. And he said we have limits under the U.S. Constitution and we're going right up to the edge of what we're able to do to protect the community that he feels that this law is protecting. I guess I have a couple thoughts. One being, okay, everyone keeps saying in the kind of pro-gender affirming care category, they keep saying, well, they're not performing the surgeries or the things that conservatives are really upset with. Those are not being performed on minors anyway. So if that's the case, then what's the big deal? If that's all that's being blocked, they say that's not happening anyway. So if that's being prohibited, I don't see what the big deal is. Now I do see it if by gender affirming care just means talking to kids, even kids younger than 18 or 17, about whether they think they might identify as some other gender, or what their options might be down the road. And if that's being prohibited, yeah, I don't think the state legislature should, be micromanaging to that level what doctors talk to parents and kids about. I get the only area with this I think this gets tricky is, because I don't really even, if the kid, the family, the doctors are all having conversations about what they think is medically appropriate, I don't really want to involve the state. I would say that on COVID topics and a bunch of other topics as well. The difficulty comes if you have parents who don't want to have this kind of have gender-affirming care for an underage kid who does, then you have a kind of conflict of rights and what the law should be, where frankly I'm not quite sure what should happen. What is your sense of this, Batya?
I think it's amazing that the law doesn't have a lower bound for how young the child could be when it would receive these protections. I mean, it uses the language "a child," and I think that what we're seeing now is essentially the setup for the 2024 presidential election. Mm-hmm. That's what this seems to me to be, is Newsom is staking out a territory to compete with Ron DeSantis, who had the parental rights and education bill, which did the exact opposite. It reaffirmed that a parent has the right to know if their child is transitioning, and that a parent has the right to be the one to educate the child about sexuality up until age 8, I believe it was. And so this is sort of, Newsom is staking out the other side of this, the other position that says, no, this is a decision that, the child and somebody else makes together, who could not be the parents if the parents are not on board with where the child is at. And I don't know about you, but this seems to me to be not, the way that the Democrats have been trying to portray this is that this is sort of that this is a polarizing issue, right? Half the nation is in the Newsom camp, right? The child should deserve every kind of gender affirming care and the parent has no rights. And then half the nation, the conservative half, is on the Ron DeSantis side saying, no, the parents have a right to have a say up until the child, it's no longer a child. But it's not the case that this is a polarizing issue. The DeSantis bill, recall, had 56% support among Democrats.
Right.
So meaning that the vast majority of the nation is on the DeSantis side of this and believes that parents have a right to have a say. I think that Glenn Youngkin's victory was another version of this. Parents showed up because they wanted to have a say in their children's education. And if you think that doesn't extend to gender affirming care, certainly does. And so I think that the Democratic elites are in for a rude awakening on this. The idea that you can now take a child from their parents' home, a child, no
Yeah.
lower bound mentioned in the language of the law, and take them to another state. That there's the reason the bill it goes out of its way to state that this is not, we don't see this as kidnapping, but I think a lot of parents would certainly see it in that way.
That is, yeah, that is so the point here. If you're taking Democrats, media figure, people who take the side of the state against parents are just always going to be in a rude awakening, because actual parents, including, as you just acknowledged, Democratic parents, independents, et cetera, no one wants to find out that, wait, I don't have say over my own child because you're saying the state knows better. And that is like a much less ambiguous case where, yeah, that is just the totally wrong way to proceed. I do start to get irritated with what looks to me like, in some cases, Republican overreach into, again, we've just tried to reappropriate the idea of my body, my choice. It is not proper for the government health officials to decree for people, what sort of medical things they're supposed to be making. And if the families are all on board and they are receiving, medical consulting, like, I don't have to approve of it. It has nothing to do with me. It's just not my business. And I think to some degree, Republicans have to watch out for losing that ethos. There's been some talk, and I don't actually think DeSantis wanted to do this, but he was like asked at a press conference and sort of gave an indication that, yeah, maybe this could be a child services issue. Like, I don't want to sick child services on families who, might be making choices I disagree with, who knows, but I don't want to sick child services on anyone. And I know that what will eventually happen is in places perhaps like California, child services will be sicked on families that are not on board with this kind of thing. The state, because in my view, the actual enforcement of the state tends toward a kind of cultural progressive, the enforcers tend to be culturally progressive. We should always be those of us who are not totally on board with everything cultural progressivism represents should be always concerned about giving more enforcement power to those agencies. I mean, conservatives are learning that lesson with Trump, with the FBI, with intelligence services. Like, don't invest more powers in these people, thinking they're gonna do what I want them to do. Like, in the long run, they don't. And that's my again, my note of caution I always sound to Republicans, like, watch out for saying, oh yeah, the state should totally go after families and parents who are doing things I don't approve of. Like, watch out for that. And according to reporting from Reuters, the new law does not grant California courts any new powers to take custody of minors away from parents. Instead, it was designed in part to prevent California courts from participating in another state's attempt to take custody away from parents for providing gender-affirming care to their child. So it's one of those situations where I'm sure it's going to be interpreted all sorts of different ways, if it is even constitutional at all, which, I don't know that it is, because this becomes then a states' rights issue. I agree. California, I don't think the state of California should have to participate in some investigation in some other state, right, if it doesn't want to. It would be weird to say that it does have to, but I don't know.
And I think...
Yeah, go ahead.
Just another point to this is we do recognize limits to parental control in certain cases, right? We as a society have come to understand, for example, that hitting your child can be construed as abuse, right? There's a level at which we understand that, as a society, certain behaviors from parents are no longer acceptable, even ones that were completely normal. Right now, we would be horrified to see a parent treat that way. And we would all agree, yes, the state should intervene and take that child away. However, the idea that gender-affirming care or refusing your child gender-affirming care has now reached that level of consensus in society is just a fantasy of leftist elites. It's quite the opposite, actually. And I think that we're in for a big discussion as a society about, because both sides are now claiming abuse, right? One side is claiming that to give this gender-affirming care is abuse. The other side is claiming to deny it is abuse. And I think that we're, as a society, there's no way around this conversation. There's only one way, which is through it. But I thought it was very neat to see kind of the lineup of like what we're likely to get much more of in 2024.
This is it. This is going to be a big issue. Yeah. Because it's clearly something that animates a lot of people on the right. But as you note, it can be a winning issue. It has more broader implications that you can't take rights, autonomy, the ability to have some say in what's going on in schools and elsewhere. You can't take that away from parents and families. Every candidate who makes it their whole personality to take decision making away from parents and families, they're going to lose. That's my political advice for the day. All right, we'll have more Rising in just a minute. Stay tuned.